Hello again. This is Dr. Rand for the Human Freedom Project. We are moving along in our discussion as to how to be free from the world, the flesh, and the devil. What this process is listed in or shown to you in a book that I mention practically every time I talk to you because that's what these sessions are about. And the book is called Rebuilding the Wounded Heart, God's Plan for the Restoration of the Soul. And that book entails everything to do with learning about everything we've talked about so far and much more. Eventually, we're going to talk about, well, there's just so many topics about this, and I've been doing it for so long. Each time I have to pray to God and say, what do I talk about next? And so today, we're going to talk a little bit more about the boardroom. There's something that came up, and I realized I didn't completely explain everything about the boardroom. So I'd like to do that today. So as we continue in these times, there are so many things we need to know about this boardroom because we have strongholds. And then there's what I call extras. We haven't even talked about those. We'll show you some of those examples in the future. There's so many things that I can only do so much at a time. And I have found that if we don't keep these short, relatively short, people look at them and say, oh, that's an hour long. I don't know if I have the time to look at it. So I'm just giving you bits and pieces. And if you want to go back to the beginning and watch them one at a time, for 2 hours, you could do it. But for now, I'm just keeping them short, and that's basically what God has told me to do. So I'm more than pleased to do what He says, and I believe that's workable. So as we talk about the boardroom, it's so important, and I'm going to show you a person's boardroom. I just picked one right off the top because they're all they're different. This one's kind of scribbly, but that's what happens when I'm counseling is I'm praying, I'm talking. We're not just delivering, but as we do the strongholds, then we counsel off of what's on the strongholds. So if you have anger and rage and hatred and resentment and bitterness and vengefulness, all on a stronghold, we can tell you just exactly how that works together. And that's where the counseling part comes in. I probably spend a half of the sessions on counseling and a half of sessions on finding what we need to deliver. So it's a combination. So it's not just deliverance. So it works very well when you use the two together as in tandem. So as we talk more about the boardroom, I want to show you just an example, and I want to talk about it a little bit. Okay, so as I'm writing, let's see if I can put it here so we can see the whole thing. Okay. As I am talking to the person and praying with them, and they're listening to God, what happens is, over here, this is a kitchen over here, and this is an anteroom. So that's their boardroom. So that's how they see it. I don't tell them what it should be. So that's number one. I do not do guided imagery, which we discussed earlier. All right, let's see if I can get it all in there. So you can see the different ages of the parts. You see on the one side, there's age 21, age 34. That's on the left side. On the right side, you see a 3-month infant part, a pre-birth part in the middle. And that pre-birth part, I always put it in the middle because the person hasn't been born and the table represents being born. So the pre-birth part is actually under the table. So as you see all these different parts, we talked last time about the fact that God gives you the parts and they're given to you because of various incidents. So in tragedies and traumas and Sometimes it's adjustments, like when a person gets married or has their children. There's always adjustments to be made, especially the first child. Uh, Someone without a job, God will give them a part to help them get through that time. Uh, so we said before, and I'll say it again, is we generally use about 10% of our brain. But the host, which is, let's see, where is the host in this one? It's up here. And the host is the about 80% of the usage of the brain. And so because the host is the 80% of the usage, all the rest of these parts, and it looks like there's at least, let's see how many, it's at least 11 more. Yeah, there's 11 parts in total. And so these 11 parts, or these other 10 parts other than the host, they're the ones that have 10 different agendas. So there's 11 agendas on this table. And so when a person comes in, they always seem to be very confused. They're not sure of who they are. And our job here is to take all of these parts and bring them into one. And so as we bring them into one, then they can be one with the Lord and one with themselves. And that's the goal of God, is to bring us into oneness. So the reason for the boardroom is to, number one, bring the parts into the room so we know how many parts there are and who the parts are and what age they are. The second thing is to find out how many strongholds and extras. And the extras, there's triangulations, there's pentagrams, there's seals of Solomon, there's discs from hell. That's kind of a fun one. We'll talk about all of those later. But Satan tends to use geometrical figures to do his will. So the second thing we do is find all the strongholds, and then we go through those strongholds, we renounce them, and then I pray against them, and then they are sent to the pit. And we do them all in order. So the third thing is you can see a number next to them. And the number is 5. Let's see if I can get my finger in here. Because everything's backwards when I'm doing this. All right, let's look over here. Right here, there's age 42. There's 7 things on that person. There's 4 strongholds and 3 extras. And number 9 means we do that 9th. So there's an order to God and there's an order to Satan, but God's order is obviously much more important. And so as we do these, we do them in order, and so there's no manifestations, which we've talked about before. Now, another interesting thing is you see here that this person has had some deliverance in the past, and so a lot of the parts are right around Jesus. And then the host is around Jesus. There's just a few parts down here that are away, and this one down here is all the way away from Jesus. So proximity is very important in doing these strongholds. And then there's always a strong man, and it talks about a strong man in the Bible. It says we are to remove the stronghold, steal from him, and then get rid of him. And that's exactly what happens. So many people try to get rid of the strong man before they get rid of everything else. The strong man, in this case, is called Gilgamesh, which I looked this up in a mythological book that I have, because I find that every mythological character turns out to be a demon. And these demons have been talking to the minds of these people from way back in these primitive times. And I don't think they were totally primitive, but they were primitive in terms of their spirituality. But there's a Gilgamesh epic that people will read. They found that in cuneiform. I believe that was in ancient, it wasn't Babylon, before Babylon. Right now I just can't think of what it was called, but pre-Babylon, we'll call it. And these spirits that are connected to all these stories that were put in people's heads, like the Greeks and the Romans, and all these mythological characters that we learn in in our education systems, a lot of that is just plain demons. And so we're teaching about demons. I'm not saying it's totally that, but I'm saying that indirectly we're teaching about demons. So what we need to do is we need to get all of this done. And then once everything is removed from each of these parts, then we remove the strong man, because he has nothing to stand on. There's no ground to stand on. So just reiterating, looking at this diagram, when we first have it, there's just a table and the outline of the boardroom. We first asked Jesus to come into that room, and you can see that he's sitting at the head of the table. And then the host comes in, and we talked about this before, but I'm just reiterating that. And as each one comes in, we will talk about each part and what happened during their life at that time. So it gives a composite of what Satan and God have done with this person over their entire life. God gives the parts, and they're a gift from him, and they help the person to dissociate so they can live a fairly normal life. And I say fairly normal because you got all these strongholds. Some of them are generational, some of them are put on during their lifetime, but you have all of these, and they have to be taken care of. Once they are removed, the person is free inside. Once the person is free inside, at least to a certain extent, because there is another 5 levels past the boardroom. And so if you go another 5 levels past the boardroom, you would basically be in the occult itself. So we talked last time about the levels, and we're going to get into that in a little while. However, right now, this is the first level, and you're free on the first level. Then when we're done with the first level, we ask, is there another level? I do not get ahead of the game and say how many levels does this person have, because then the person gets a little disheartened and sometimes would like to quit, because this is hard work. It's not easy to go through this process. So as we find out that there's another level, then we go to that, and then at that point we move on to a different type of arrangement. It's not a boardroom anymore, and we'll talk about that later. There's so many things to talk about. I can only do so much. So this is what a boardroom looks like. It's kind of scribbled. Sometimes I do it a whole lot better, but this gives you an idea of what I see as I'm working. And as I look at these, I do the process of 1, 2, 3. 1 being finding the parts, 2 being finding out what's on them, and 3 spiritually, negatively, spiritually, and 3 is finding what order we do them in. And so if we try to do like number 9 before we do number 1, we can have manifestations. I've seen that before, and I really don't want manifestations in my room. And it's just very calm. It's very sedate, except for the person as we get into some of these parts. I'm going to put this down. As we get into some of the parts, we find out, first of all, let's say it's a 3-year-old, and the 3-year-old has been abused. So like in my case, I'll just use my case. I was abused for the first time when I was 3. And I didn't remember it. It was dissociated till I was 52. And that happens with quite a few of my clients. They don't remember their early abuse. And as we do this process, that will come out. But usually if you're abused, that will be one of the later ones. That would be like a 9 instead of a 1. And that was the same in my case. It's the same just about across the board. The worst stuff that could happen to a person The worst trauma that could happen to a person is usually what we deal with last in the boardroom. The most simple things, and usually the parts are close to Jesus, they're usually done first. God knows the order. God supplies the parts. God does everything. I facilitate. That's my job. So let's say we got a 3-year-old and the 3-year-old has been abused, and all of a sudden the 3-year-old remembers. In my case, I didn't cry or anything, and God, but in a lot of cases, the client starts to break down because they either see or feel or both the abuse that's happening to them. And so as it starts to come out and they realize that it actually happened, and I never push to find abuse. It just happens when we do it this way. It's the best way to find it. It's the best way to get to the bottom of everything because God is in charge. He is the counselor. He is the physician. He is the one that puts his arms around them as they're going through their trauma. He will sit next to them, or he will hold them in his arms, especially younger parts. He'll pick them up. And as we're doing the strongholds, he holds them and protects them. It's a beautiful thing when you see it. I'll be looking at a person and they're full grown, and yet I'm talking to a 3-year-old part of them, and they actually sound like they're 3 years old. So as we do this process, there are so many heart-wrenching things that we run into. And you have to be pretty strong spiritually to be able to handle that. And it's hard. It's hard in my heart to watch some of this. There's so many tears in my room all the time because we get to the very deepest of stuff, and that affects a person so deeply. And I care for these people, and that makes me want to work harder for them. I know what it's like to be abused. And so when someone has been abused and we find that, and God shows it, he'll show them pictures, but he will only show them enough pictures to help them to understand that it happened. But he doesn't put people through, tremendous numbers of memories. Like when I was 52 and started getting the memories, I got memories every night for 6 months. And I think he did that on purpose so that I would understand how deep this process is. So my heart goes out to these people, and I realize that they have this deficit just like I had. And this 3-year-old part of me was looking for nurturing all the rest of my life until I realized that I didn't need to keep looking. It was in God. And so these people eventually, after they have gone through the process and after we've talked, and usually I give them time to let God comfort them, I just sit there silently. I'm not there to control the situation. I'm there for them to become aware of it. And most of the time we're not aware of these kinds of things. So it's all of a sudden shock. And if Jesus wasn't there, I can't imagine what would be happening. And that's why Jesus is brought into every session, into every instance in that session, every aspect, every trauma, everything. Jesus has to be our everything, and in this room, Jesus is everything. And I have learned that I just need to be quiet a lot of times, just not say anything. But a lot of times, there are times when I just cry. Just the abuse, the level of abuse that I hear. Fortunately, I don't know if God's given me this as a gift, but when our offices are in the back half of the house, and we live in the front of the house. And when I move from the back to the front, I just kind of let it go. I don't take other people's problems on myself. That doesn't mean I can't care. That doesn't mean I don't love them. That doesn't mean I don't want to help them. It just means I, like 1, 2, 3, God first, me second, others third. If I don't take care of myself and get so codependent and get all wrapped up in it, I won't be able to help them in the long run. I'll get burned out. So that's probably why at my age I can still be doing this, because I can separate that. And then as soon as I get back in the room, my mind is right back on what we're doing. And I can pick up from where we were the last time. So that's a gift from God, and it's just, there's no doubt about it. So as we do these videos, we need to stop here at this point. But I want you to always remember, if the Son has freed you, you will be freed indeed. So goodbye, and God bless.